Throughout human history, we have had to endure the scary reality of a pandemic. From the Black Death to the AIDS crisis, of course COVID-19, society has endured shifting norms, changes in routines, big and small, and of course, sickness and death. You would think with such big, devastating events like this, we would have learned some lessons on how to best deal with it. But if modern events are any indicator, even with our technology, everyone was affected. Whether the effects were minor or life-changing, they were present. What happens if we compare modern pandemics, such as COVID-19, to the past? What was the same? What was different? And how was society impacted beyond the terrible casualties we endured? That's what we will be talking about today on the Historical History Channel.
It's probably best to start at the beginning, the first documented pandemic, or at least one that describes real eyewitness details versus relating everything to divine intervention. The Plague of Athens was recorded to have occurred between 430 and 426 BCE. The documentation we have is from Thucydides, the Athenian historian and general who personally contracted and survived the disease. The pandemic occurred during the second year of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. The city of Athens, led by Pericles, had crowded behind its defensive walls due to the Spartan siege, and without proper infrastructure to help alleviate such a crisis, perfect conditions were created for disease spread. At first, the plague was likely treated as an unusual sickness, perhaps a punishment from the gods, a common view in ancient societies. As the death toll rose rapidly and indiscriminately, however, fear spread faster than the disease. The deaths became impossible to ignore due to their sheer scale. Entire households wiped out, physicians dying, often first because they were exposed most, and bodies piling up in the streets. The disease's violent and bizarre symptoms made it more terrifying. Victims died within days, often in pain and isolation. Thucydides notes how unprepared the Athenian leadership was despite the city's size and resources. There was no real infrastructure to respond. The exact pathogen remains unknown, but modern scholars have proposed several candidates based on Thucydides' account. Typhoid fever is the most popular choice, as it is supported by DNA evidence from mass graves found in Athens. It spread quickly due to overcrowding, poor sanitation, and contaminated water. The concept of germ theory wouldn't appear for over 2,000 years, so Athenians had no biological understanding of how diseases spread. That said, there was a rudimentary recognition that certain conditions, like crowding, were dangerous. Thucydides observed that those who cared for the sick were most at risk, and the disease spread rapidly in the crowded city. The plague erupted shortly after the rural population of Attica had fled behind the city walls to escape the Spartan invasion, increasing Athens' population density dramatically. Athens was trapped in a strategic bind: stay inside and risk plague, or go outside and risk Spartan attacks. It must be noted, Thucydides never explicitly said the crowding caused the plague, but his writing makes it clear that the conditions in the city exacerbated the outbreak, and survivors gained immunity, which was a major insight centuries ahead of its time. How else was Athens affected? Well, at its height, the population, including refugees from the countryside, may have reached 200,000 to 300,000 people. The plague is believed to have killed 75,000 to 100,000 people, with mortality estimates ranging from 20% to 33%. Death was indiscriminate. The poor died in crowded hovels, But even the rich and powerful, those who could afford private physicians, were not spared. The plague returned in multiple waves over several years, 430 BCE, 429 BCE, and again in 427 BCE, each compounding the societal trauma. The sheer number of corpses overwhelmed funeral customs. Cremations were rushed, bodies were burned in shared pyres or abandoned in temples and public spaces. The death of Pericles, Athens' most respected statesman, left a leadership vacuum. His successors, like Cleon and Alcibiades, were more aggressive and less strategic, leading to reckless decisions. Post-plague Athens became politically unstable and increasingly polarized. The emotional and cultural scars endured. Religious faith waned, moral codes collapsed, and the sense of exceptionalism that defined the Athenian Golden Age was lost. Survivors held on to a collective PTSD, feeling lucky to be alive, yet fearful for what's to come. This destroyed the society, as people didn't feel like they had a future to plan for. Families were ripped apart, entire neighborhoods of culture and history were decimated. Athens would suffer a crushing defeat in 404 BCE, and though it remained a cultural center, its political power never returned to pre-plague levels. Though separated by nearly 2.5 millennia, the Plague of Athens and the COVID-19 pandemic unfolded in eerily similar ways. In both cases, crowded urban conditions turned cities into incubators of disease, spreading sickness with terrifying speed. Medical systems were overwhelmed. Ancient doctors died treating the sick, just as modern physicians fought on the front lines with limited resources and shifting guidance. Fear drove people to isolate and abandon loved ones, while funerals became distant or disappeared entirely. Social trust collapsed. Athenians abandoned their gods and laws, just as modern societies fractured along political and cultural lines. And in both eras, the aftermath was not just medical, it was moral, political, and deeply psychological. Each pandemic left a scar not only on bodies, but on the very soul of society.
Now that I have pumped you with sunshine and rainbows, let's keep moving. The Antonine Plague, also known as Plague of Galen, due to the documentation of this incident coming from a physician named Galen, occurred between 165 and 180 CE. The Antonine Plague struck during the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius at the height of the Roman Empire's power. It began in 165 CE, likely brought back by Roman soldiers returning from campaigns in the east, particularly Mesopotamia, which is modern Iraq. The Roman Empire was then a sprawling, multi-ethnic superstate, highly interconnected by roads, trade routes, and military activity, which accelerated the disease's spread across continents. The exact pathogen is unknown, but based on contemporary descriptions, historians and epidemiologists believe it was likely smallpox. The Antonine Plague swept through the Roman Empire like a silent army, killing as many as 10 million people over 15 years. In the capital, 2,000 lives were lost each day at the height of the crisis. Entire towns were emptied, entire legions fell. Mortality soared to 1 in 4 in some provinces, a loss so profound it shook the empire's foundation. The physician Galen recorded its symptoms in detail: fever, diarrhea, sore throat, and a disfiguring rash. But even Rome's greatest minds could offer no cure. As the military crumbled, Emperor Marcus Aurelius turned to gladiators and slaves to refill his ranks. The economy faltered. Food became scarce. Trade routes quieted.
fear took root. Blame turned toward Christians, and persecution followed. In the shadow of this plague, Rome's long peace, the Pax Romana, came to an end. What had seemed like the eternal empire was suddenly mortal. Like COVID-19, the Antonine plague spread along the veins of a globalized world, carried not by ignorance, but by connection. And like COVID, it revealed the fragility beneath the empire's power. Overwhelmed caregivers, political stress, economic collapse, and public confusion. In both pandemics, it wasn't just the sick who suffered. It was the very idea that our systems could protect us. And in both, the true damage lingered long after the disease had passed.
Up next, the first historically documented outbreak of bubonic plague caused by Yersinia pestis. And no, I am not referring to the Black Death. But don't worry, that one's coming for all of us. Anyway, in the year 541, a silent terror arrived by sea. Aboard grain ships from Egypt came not just cargo, but killers. Fleas riding on black rats, carrying a deadly bacterium, Yersinia pestis. What began in the bustling port of Constantinople soon swept across an empire. At its peak, 10,000 people died each day in the capital alone. Streets overflowed with corpses. Farms were abandoned. Entire villages vanished. It's now referred to as the Plague of Justinian. The court historian Procopius wrote that no words could express the horror. Victims fell with sudden fevers and grotesque swellings in the neck and groin, often dying within days. Even Emperor Justinian himself fell ill. Though he recovered, he never fully regained his grip on power. His grand vision of reuniting the Roman Empire crumbled under the weight of mass death and economic collapse. As fear spread, so too did blame. Many saw the plague as divine punishment. Others targeted heretics or outsiders. Priests and monks died in droves while leading prayer processions, efforts that only fueled the contagion. The imperial treasury emptied, armies dwindled, and enemies pressed in on all fronts. This was not just a biological catastrophe. It was a turning point. The plague shattered the Byzantine dream of restoration, and in doing so, it may have shaped the very map of Europe that followed. Had the plague not struck, there might have been no East and West, no medieval fragmentation, no Europe as we know it. 16 centuries apart, two empires, one ancient, one modern, were brought to a standstill by disease. The plague of Justinian arrived by sea, COVID-19 by jet. Both found fertile ground in societies built on connection, mobility, and ambition. As bodies piled up, institutions strained, leaders faltered, and fear spread faster than any pathogen. In both cases, the dead were not the only victims. Faith wavered, economies shattered, and everyday life came undone. And just as Justinian's empire never fully recovered its vision of unity and conquest, so too will the modern world carry the scars of COVID long after the virus has faded. The tools may have changed, but the human experience of pandemic remains deeply, painfully familiar. Some consistent themes are starting to pop up as we continue, no? Let's see if this trend keeps up. Hold on to your butt cheeks. It's time to talk about the big one we were taught in history class. The Black Death, which occurred 1347 through 1351, is one of the most devastating and transformative events in human history. Far more than a tragic loss of life,
It was a cultural, political, economic, and psychological earthquake. In 1347, death slipped quietly into Europe aboard Genoese trading ships from the Crimean port of Caffa. What they carried was invisible, a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, born in the heart of Central Asia and destined to reshape the world. As the ships docked in Sicily, and later in Marseille, Genoa, and Venice, the infection began to spread, swiftly, relentlessly, along trade routes that once brought silk and spices, now bringing only silence and suffering. The plague came in 3 deadly forms. The most common was bubonic, marked by grotesque swellings in the groin and armpits, buboes that blackened with infection. More deadly still was the pneumonic form, passed through the air, attacking the lungs and turning breath into death. And in its most terrifying shape, septicemic plague, it invaded the blood directly, killing in a matter of hours. No one was safe. No one was spared. What had begun as commerce had become catastrophe. The numbers defy comprehension. Between 75 and 200 million lives lost across continents. In Europe alone, as much as 60% of the population vanished in just a few years. Entire villages disappeared without a trace, their homes left to rot, their names forgotten. Death was swift and indiscriminate. Rich or poor, child or elder, none were spared. In cities, carts rolled endlessly through the streets, piled with bodies. Graveyards overflowed, mass pits were dug in haste, prayers muttered quickly, if at all. And in many places, the dying were left alone, with no one to hold their hand, no one to remember their name. The world became quieter, emptier, and unrecognizably changed. With no cure and no answers, people turned to faith and fear. Many saw the plague as divine punishment for a sinful world. In desperation, roving bands of flagellants marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public rituals of penance, hoping pain might bring mercy. Others turned their fear into hatred. Rumors spread that Jews had poisoned wells, and across Europe, communities that had stood for centuries were wiped out in flames and blood. In the face of an invisible enemy, society turned on itself. Cities, once vibrant centers of trade, shrank or vanished. Fields lay fallow, reclaimed by wild growth. But for the survivors, opportunity emerged. Land was suddenly available. Wealth passed into fewer hands. A quiet redistribution of power began, not through conquest, but through absence. Trade routes faltered. Artisan guilds collapsed from within, their members dead or dispersed. The old economic order, long taken for granted, now stood on uncertain ground. Out of plague and ruin, a new world was beginning to form, shaped not by kings or conquest, but by death and those left behind. In the wake of the Black Death, a new darkness settled over the human imagination. Art turned inward, fixated on death, decay, and divine judgment. The dance of death, danse macabre, crept across cathedral walls and manuscripts, a grim reminder that no one escaped the grave. Gothic churches took on sharper lines, more shadow than light. The world, it seemed, had been stripped of its certainty. Religion did not disappear, but it changed. Faith became more personal, more mystical. People sought answers in visions, relics, and solitary prayer. With priests and bishops dead in vast numbers, the Church's authority was shaken. In that vacuum, new movements stirred, some holy, some heretical. And out of all this suffering, something unexpected began to take shape. The social pyramid wobbled. Quarantine zones were established. Plague hospitals emerged. For the first time, cities began to think in terms of public health. The world did not recover quickly. In many regions, it would take centuries for populations to return. But the world that emerged was not the same. In the silence left by the plague, new ideas took root, ideas that would one day ignite the Renaissance. So, now that you're feeling really positive and good, let's compare the Black Death to COVID-19. We see a lot of similarities to examples above. The Black Death spread through Silk Road trade, merchant ships, and overland caravans. Rats and fleas were the primary vectors. With COVID, we saw it spread via international air travel and modern supply chains, reaching every inhabited continent within months. In both pandemics, it was not isolation that killed, but connection. The same routes that carried goods and wealth carried death. Another example is misinformation. During the Black Death, people had no understanding of bacteria, so many turned to other explanations. Theories included bad air, miasma, divine wrath, and astrological events.
When COVID-19 hit, it was a novel virus with evolving variants. Early theories, misinformation, and political debates clouded its origins. Then, as now, fear fed on ignorance, and uncertainty bred suspicion. With the Black Death, no real medical system existed. Doctors fled or died, and many treatments worsened outcomes. During COVID, hospitals barred visitors. Patients died alone. Mourning became digital, distanced, or delayed. Whether in the 14th century or the 21st, the pandemic severed our most human instinct, to be present in death. Both pandemics turned fear into fuel for cultural shifts and social fractures. Religious extremism, scapegoating of Jews, and a crisis of faith became normal during the Black Death, whereas COVID triggered political division, distrust in science or institutions, and a rise in misinformation and social movements. Once again, we see economic gains being made by the workers during both pandemics. With Black Death, so many died it disrupted the balance of power towards peasants, and serfdom declined. With COVID, remote work exploded, labor movements gained traction, and essential workers demanded better conditions. During the Black Death, death itself took center stage. Art was haunted by skeletons and silence. The danse macabre reminded all that prince and pauper danced to the same final tune. Centuries later, COVID-19 would leave its own cultural imprint, not through frescoes or cathedral walls, but in music, film, and digital life. Isolation became a theme, so did resilience, anxiety, and the quiet weight of grief. Phew, let's take a moment. Pretty grim stuff, huh? I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad here, really. Here, let me say something to sort of break the ice, cleanse the palate, if you will. Okay, here we go. Poop boob. All right, you should be laughing now. Anyway, with the big one out of the way, we're going to go through the next pandemics a little quicker, as I think the themes that are crossing centuries are starting to become clear. Let's talk about the third cholera pandemic, which is said to be the deadliest of the 19th century cholera outbreaks. By the mid-19th century, a new enemy haunted the world's growing cities: cholera. It arrived quietly in water no one questioned, and killed with horrifying speed, sometimes within hours. In London, the disease tore through the city's poorest neighborhoods, where clean water was a luxury and sewage ran through the streets. But out of tragedy came revolution. In 1854, a doctor named John Snow defied the conventional wisdom of his time. While others blamed foul air, Snow mapped the deaths, followed the data, and traced the source to a single water pump on Broad Street. When the pump handle was removed, the outbreak stopped. This moment didn't just save lives, it changed medicine forever. It marked the birth of modern epidemiology, proving that disease could be traced, studied, and stopped. In the wake of the pandemic, cities began to build the very systems we now take for granted: sewers, clean water, and public health laws. In the 1850s, it was water. In 2020, it was air. But both pandemics revealed the same uncomfortable truth:
The greatest danger isn't just the pathogen, it's how unprepared our systems are to stop it. During the third cholera pandemic, a lone physician with a map changed everything. John Snow's work on a single London water pump sparked the birth of epidemiology and led to clean water systems that still save lives today. In our own time, COVID-19 made scientists and policymakers race to understand transmission, deploy vaccines, and track the virus in real time. And like cholera, it struck hardest in places already left behind, where inequality meant infection and prevention wasn't an option. 2 different centuries, 2 different diseases, but the lesson remains the same. Pandemics don't just expose weakness, they offer a chance to rebuild stronger. In the final months of the First World War, a new enemy began to spread, faster than bullets, more lethal than bombs. It arrived with a cough, a fever, and a terrifying silence. Known as the Spanish flu, it infected 1 out of every 3 people on Earth. The name was misleading. Spain simply told the truth, while other nations, locked in war, kept it quiet. Soldiers returning home brought the virus with them. So did sailors, migrants, and mail carriers. In cities from Philadelphia to Bombay, streets emptied, hospitals overflowed, and funerals became a luxury few could afford. Unlike most flu outbreaks, it targeted the strong. Young men and women, those just home from the trenches, died in staggering numbers. Entire families vanished in days. Makeshift hospitals filled churches and schoolhouses. Authorities called for masks and isolation, but with no vaccine, no antibiotics, and little coordination, the virus surged unchecked. When the final wave passed in 1920, the dead numbered in the tens of millions. Yet the world spoke of it little. Overshadowed by war, the pandemic became a ghost in the public memory. But it had changed everything. It left behind new public health systems, a wary population, and a world that, for the first time, had seen what global contagion truly meant. A century apart, 2 pandemics swept the globe, each born from different microbes, yet carrying the same message. The Spanish flu emerged in the final days of World War I, killing with terrifying speed and silence. COVID-19 arrived in the age of data and satellites, but it spread just as fast, fueled by connection, confusion, and delay. Both overwhelmed hospitals. Both triggered quarantines, mask mandates, and fear. In 1918, it was church bells tolling for the dead. In 2020, it was ambulance sirens and the glow of screens in isolation. Yet both were met with doubt, denial, and division. In 1918, the truth was buried to protect wartime morale. In 2020, it drowned in the noise of algorithms and opinion. And when each virus passed, the world it left behind was not the same. Out of the Spanish flu came the foundations of modern public health. Out of COVID-19, a new understanding of risk, resilience, and the invisible threads that bind us. The disease may have changed, but the human story remains the same, fragile, familiar, and unfinished.
In 1957, a new influenza virus emerged in the mountains of southern China. It moved quietly at first, crossing borders, boarding ships, taking flight aboard the new engines of global travel. Within months, the Asian flu had reached every continent. Schools, barracks, and factories became flashpoints. More than 1 million people would die. But this pandemic arrived in a world that was learning. scientists quickly isolated the virus. Within weeks, they developed a vaccine, one of the fastest turnarounds in medical history. Immunization campaigns followed. The flu spread quickly, but so did the response. Unlike past pandemics, the world didn't panic. There were no lockdowns, no empty shelves, no global headlines. The virus passed, quietly for some, fatally for others, but its lessons echoed forward. Compared to how we reacted in modern times to COVID-19, the results are actually quite depressing. After killing over 1 million people in 1957, a vaccine to fight against the Asian flu was developed. And with other methods, such as isolation, the virus was stopped. Cooperation was key. Then came COVID-19, a virus just as invisible. But this time, the world responded not with calm, but with collapse. Airports closed, cities locked down, screens became our lifelines. And though science moved faster than ever, delivering a vaccine in record time, division spread just as fast. These two pandemics were separated by 60 years, but they offer a single lesson. A virus tests more than our bodies. It tests our systems, our values, and our memory. One pandemic passed quietly. The other left a scar we may never forget.
In the early 1980s, a new disease began to claim lives, but only quietly at first, and only in communities the world preferred to ignore. What followed was not just a pandemic, it was a reckoning. HIV/AIDS didn't move like the plagues before it. It spread slowly, person to person, without fanfare, but with lethal certainty. At its peak, tens of millions were infected. Entire communities vanished. In Africa, families were torn apart. In Western cities, artists, lovers, and friends disappeared by the thousands. Governments hesitated, society judged. And while the virus attacked the immune system, stigma attacked the soul. But something extraordinary happened. The dying began to fight back. Activists took to the streets. Scientists raced for answers. A new generation refused to be silent. From tragedy came transformation. Antiretroviral drugs gave life. Global programs saved millions. And the message spread. Undetectable means untransmittable. The HIV/AIDS pandemic may have begun in silence, but it built a movement that continues to speak loud and clear. Two pandemics, two eras, one shaped by silence, the other by saturation. HIV/AIDS moved slowly, quietly through the veins of society, killing millions before the world could even say its name. It was a crisis of inaction, born from prejudice and shame. COVID-19 came fast and loud, in headlines and lockdowns. Everyone was at risk, but not equally. As the world closed its borders, inequality opened wide. One virus targeted the marginalized, the other revealed how fragile even the privileged could be. In both cases, the real story wasn't just the pathogen, it was how we responded, with fear, with courage, with division, with care. From the candlelight vigils of the AIDS crisis to the nightly applause for COVID's healthcare workers, these pandemics remind us that disease doesn't just test medicine. It tests memory, morality, and who we choose to stand with when it matters most. Finally, in 2009, a new flu virus made its way from pig farms to people, and then to every continent. It was called H1N1, but the world knew it as swine flu. Within weeks, schools closed, airports screened passengers, and the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. But this flu wasn't like the ones that had come before. It spread quickly, yes, but most who caught it recovered. The virus was deadly, but not devastating. The youngest were hit hardest. Older generations, ironically, had some protection, possibly from flus long past. Scientists acted fast. Within 6 months, a vaccine was ready. But by then, the world was already moving on. When the virus faded, many asked, was the threat ever real? Was the panic overblown? In that skepticism, something dangerous took root. Investments in preparedness faded. Pandemic plans were shelved. And when the next virus came, one far more dangerous, the world would discover just how much it had forgotten. H1N1 spread across the world in months, but it spared most who caught it. A vaccine arrived quickly. Hospitals coped, and the world breathed a sigh of relief. It was a pandemic that barely left a scar. But that success came at a cost. When COVID-19 emerged a decade later, many assumed it would be more of the same. Another flu, another brief scare. But this virus didn't just spread. It overwhelmed. It shut down cities, crashed economies, and left millions dead. The tools we built after H1N1, vaccine labs, surveillance systems, global partnerships, were real. But many had been underfunded, underused, or ignored. What H1N1 revealed, COVID confirmed. The gap between knowledge and action can be the difference between control and catastrophe. From ancient Athens to modern Wuhan, pandemics have tested humanity in every age. We've learned to trace invisible enemies, to build better hospitals, to develop vaccines in record time. But we've also learned that medicine alone is not enough. To survive a pandemic is not just to outlast a virus, it's to carry forward the lessons it forced us to learn. About science, about systems, and most of all, about each other. COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic, but if we remember what history has taught us, it doesn't have to be the next disaster.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment if you have something to share. See you next week with our next historical history documentary.